Rosenquist. It's all yours.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I got a question for you. Right? By show of hands, how many people here love security? Have a passion for it? Think you got it? It's solved. You're happy with your security. Keep your hands up. You're happy with your security organization. This is what you live for. All right, I've got a few. Liars. Both of you, liars. All right, okay, by show of hands, how many people believe cybersecurity is the bane of their existence? It is confusing. It is difficult. It is a challenge. They have nightmares about it. Come on, who's willing to raise their hand? All right, I'm in the right room then. Right. Actually, I love it. I'm passionate about it. I'm Matthew Rosenquist. I'm with Intel. Right. I have the best job in the world. I'm a security strategist. I'm not here to sell you anything. Actually, my job as part of Intel that we've been doing for many, many years is investing in security to make the world, whether using our technology or not, making it more secure. And as that, I get to look at the industry. I get to look at the attackers. I get to look at the infrastructures and the targets that they attack. And I even get to go out to organizations such as yours and sit down behind closed doors and ask the simple questions. What worry you? What troubles you? What are you having problems with? I have the ability to share across different organizations best known methods, what works, what doesn't. At Intel, we've secured over the many years, right, some of the most valuable intellectual property in the world. We've had a lot of people that have interest in it. We've done many, many, many good things, invested a lot of money. We've done some not so good things, but we've learned from them. And so I'm here, and as part of a strategist, I get to talk about those things. And I'm hoping today that I'll talk about some things that resonate with you, give you some insights, maybe that can help you as leaders of your organization. Because the one thing that we all have in common, whether we raised our hand or not, is we're all potential victims. So let's have a conversation today. And again, it's important. Oh, this is the contribution from my lawyers. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll all read that in the fine print. One of the benefits that we all have is we get to communicate, and yet we don't do that very much. And that's with each other. It's also within our organizations. And one of the things in the about 20 years now of security that I've been doing, one of the key aspects that we've learned at Intel is this. We manage security through leadership. And when there's an absence of that leadership, there's crisis. Now, I speak from experience. I actually built Intel's first 24/7 security operations center. And the day I turned on my sensors, me and my team of about 27 analysts, we had over 2 million alerts come in one day. And it didn't stop. Again, without leadership, there's crisis. Now, you as leaders of your organization, we have to make a decision. Do we commit to security? Do we define what the right level of security is, what that right level of risk is? Do we commit the resources? Do we communicate that down to our staffs, to our management, to the functionaries who are going to make it happen? Do they know on any given day what their mission is, what their goal is? It's up to us. If we're not doing that, I guarantee you, we find crisis. And I'm sure some of you, actually, I would venture to say all of us have felt that. So today I'd like to talk about a few things. Let's talk about the industry. Let's talk about the trends and the challenges that we all face. Let's talk about that strategic leadership. And it's easy to say that word leadership. It's another thing entirely, actually, to set those goals, to talk about it in terms of doing something, taking action. We'll go over a couple of risks. I've cherry-picked a couple of risks that we feel today, and they're going to get worse tomorrow. And on the converse, right, some of the benefits, some of the technological and behavioral changes that are working to intersect with those threats. Now, our industry is very, very dynamic. Right? There are the attackers. We typically are the defenders of the targets. And it's constantly changing. There is not a single security technology that will fix the problem. If there was, we wouldn't be here. We'd buy that technology and it'd be done. With today's attackers, they are dynamic, and they tend to maintain the initiative. And in any fight, having the initiative is a tremendous advantage. So we'll talk about that. And at the very end, and again, you can submit your questions, and I'll answer them at the very end. And we talked about communication just a minute ago. Asking questions is great. Please, post to the web, to Twitter, whatnot. But even when you leave, when you get out of that seat, you should be thinking communication, communication with your peers, communication with industry experts. The bad guys, they communicate real well. They share code. They communicate which targets are easy. Right? We'll get into a little bit of it in the presentation. But they're communicating. They're working together. We have to too. Otherwise, we can't put up any kind of fight. So think about that. All right. So what are we looking at in the industry? Well, if we start at the left here, right, data collection and aggregation, we're seeing that go up tremendously. Right? Whether it be through social networks, whether it be through companies providing more information, organizations giving more information, employees wanting to communicate information that may or may not be right. We see that. And because it's being aggregated, the bad guys have a tremendous pool, a tremendous resource to be able to target individuals, groups, entire organizations. What used to be very difficult now becomes very easy. And we're all part of that. And it's not to say that we shouldn't share information. We should, absolutely, like I was just saying. But we need to be cognizant of it, of how much is being captured and how it can be used against us. The second thing is regulatory compliance, and we're seeing this all across the globe. There is no one standard. They're constantly changing. Some industries are more regulated than others, whether it be healthcare or commerce. We have to worry about that. We have to make sure our organizations are in compliance with it. And when I sit down and talk one-on-one with officers such as yourself, in many cases that is the number one thing. I want to make sure my company or my organization is compliant. And just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure. We know that, right? But it's important because they're constantly changing. The privacy regulations are probably changing the fastest. The third area is virtualization. And where we see this take effect the most is in the data centers. And it's a wonderful technology. Right? What used to take 20 servers can now be done by the work of one. It's very cost effective. And because it's very cost effective, organizations tend to jump to it and embrace it very, very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that they overlook the risks, because there are risks for every new technology. We have to deal with that. And the same thing goes for the next area. Private, hybrid, public clouds. Clouds are, again, wonderful technology that can extend services out to your customers, to your business partners, your employees, and do so in a manner that couldn't be done 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's a great technology. But again, with every new technology, there come risks. And we have to understand that, because that can undermine that data, that information, that relationship that you have with your customers. The explosion of internet devices, and the current estimates are in the next 10 years, we're going to have 50 billion devices connected to the internet, talking to each other, talking to cloud, talking to everything. And again, Rod talked about a little of them, right? You've even got technology that's being developed to integrate with our bodies and our shoes and our sunglasses and everything else. We have to worry about that. Because if that information is being gathered, new technology, new risks. Now, IT's got a tough job, and in your organization, it doesn't get any easier. Because today, in our society, what we're witnessing, like never before, is technology innovation and adoption at such a rapid pace. It is tough to keep pace. And in fact, security tends to be one of the last things considered. And IT departments are being asked to embrace the technology, to empower their employees in communication, reaching out to customers and whatnot. But at the same time, there are also demands on them to make sure that it's secure. And if the IT department doesn't move fast enough, the employees may do it themselves. Right? Which leads us, to situations that we can't control or can't control very well. And that kind of leads us into the complexity of that IT model. If your IT department is being challenged with extending out what it does, right, it doesn't have the chance to control it, to secure it, that becomes a problem. That becomes a liability for all of us. The last circle there is my favorite one. I could spend all day talking about this. The size of the bubble there does not reflect its importance on the diagram. We are in a fight, every one of us. All our organizations, all our systems, all our devices. And the threat, unfortunate, can be smarter than us, can be more savvy than us, can have more tools and resources at their disposal, and they can be very persistent. It is a living, breathing, intelligent threat. Whether it's the criminal hackers that we just heard about, whether it's the nation states, doesn't matter. There is a person or people behind it. And they adapt. They think. They normally have the initiative. And they're getting smarter. So we all have these challenges, and over time, they get worse. And I came from an IT background years and years ago. The IT threats, the technology threats to normal IT support services are what we consider single-faceted threats. For example, if I have a power supply that goes out on a server in my data center, well, I know what I have to do. I have to go down there, I have to rip out the power supply, put in a new one, start it back up. Simple. It's scriptable. It's easy. And once that's there, I'm done. Cyber threats are different. Right? They're not scriptable. They're not easy. They're constantly evolving. It's an opposing force. You move one way, they move another. Okay? So let's take a look at some of the metrics and really what they mean in the industry. And I've just picked out a few. You can do a search on security metrics and come hundreds of different metrics, but these are the ones that we'll talk about today. New malware. Last year when I was talking to groups, we were talking about every single day. Back then, a year ago, it was about 90,000 new pieces of malware were discovered every day. And we thought, and this was a year ago, we thought, how could that even be true? Right? Well, it is. And this year, the problem is twice as bad. So that particular metric is from McAfee. And I talk with the guys there that have to deal with this every single day because they're out there protecting their customers. They have to deal with this type of scourge, right? And they have to protect the customers very, very quickly because the next day there's another 200,000 different types different unique pieces of malware that are going to come in. It's like drinking from a fire hose. That's not going to change. Why? Because a 6-year-old today can go out to a web page, click on a few boxes, and that web page will create customized malware for them. It's that easy. Now, advanced actors, they write it themselves. Even more advanced actors and threat agents, they go off and they discover vulnerabilities that nobody's even known and then write their malware for it. This number's not going to go down. Now, the next box there, the one in the middle, is about signed malware. We all like easy answers. We all do. I do. But it becomes a challenge. It is false hope. Right? A couple years ago, we were having lots of problems with Trojan type of attacks, where a piece of software would be grabbed by a bad guy and they would insert malware into it and then distribute it. And the solution, of course, was to sign the software. And everybody thought, oh, hey, problem solved. We're done. Right? It uses encryption kind of technology, very difficult. Wrong. The threat agents, the attackers, they adapted. And now we're seeing a huge rise in the amount of maliciously signed code. Right? It helped for a while, but it's not nirvana. The chart on the right there talks again about new technologies and the fact that when a new technology comes out, it's targeted very, very quickly. Now, Intel and many companies like us, we live on innovation. We live on developing new products and getting them out to market faster than our competitors. But again, there's a risk. Because once it's out there, the attackers are going to go after it. In the bottom here, it was estimated last year over 30% of all systems, of all computer systems out in the world were attacked. 1 in 3, approximately. That's a huge number. Right? We don't see that number changing very much either, going up if anything. Now multiply that by the number of devices that are going to be on the internet and connected. The problem gets worse. Half of all adults were victimized in some way on the internet. Half. Lastly, because that kind of speaks to the individual, and these numbers vary. I just saw a report not too long ago, it said 91%, but let's just go with the 90s, in the 90% range. And these are survey data. For organizations just like yours, just like mine, over 90% of them suffered a data breach, a data loss. Right? Good for the 10%, or not really, because that's survey data, which means it's only the organizations that knew they had a breach. Many organizations don't. I was talking with the guys from Verizon, who do breach investigations. And their comment was, it's not whether you've been breached, right? It's just when. It will happen. This is an eye chart, but there's 3 things to note here. Take a look at the brown color. The brown color is unknown. This is a chart of security incidents, but the brown color is unknown. Now that's significant. Right? It means you know you were attacked, you were victimized, but you don't even know how it was done. And that's a problem, because if you don't know how it was done, what stops them from doing it again? Right? We see this throughout the industry. The second thing to note, right? Look at the different types of organizations there. No one is exempt. You cannot hide. Those days are long past. Everyone is targeted. Every single one of your organizations is targeted. You can't get away. The third, and in my mind the most compelling point, these are just the reported incidents. Now, I'm sure everybody here reports all of their incidents, right? No. This is the tip of the iceberg. Okay. So what does that mean? What are the metrics? What do the numbers really mean to us? All right, let's talk about it. Right, Lloyd's rates risks. And the position for malicious and non-malicious in 2011 was ranked 12 and 19 respectively. Right, in 2012 that jumped up to number 3. There was a recent survey done in the United States with government leaders and whatnot, and they ranked cybersecurity number 1 threat to the United States. It was actually above terrorism. Right? These are the guys that know. These are the ones that are worried. That's what the data in the past few slides mean. Right? Financially speaking, when we look at the costs, right, in the United States, it is estimated that it costs the U.S. 500,000 jobs a year. We're talking IP loss, we're talking financial impact, we're talking fraud. All those contribute to that. That number's going up. And we are in a very chaotic industry. This is actually one of my favorite quotes. This is from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. And what this is they actually recommended that cybersecurity, right, should not be listed as an occupation or as a profession, simply because the rate of change is too great. What we're doing now, what you ask a cyber professional to do today, will be different dramatically in 12 or 18 months. The expectation, the role, their actions, their responsibilities will change that fast. Ask yourself now, in your organization, are you changing that fast? Down at the bottom here, we all know the world is getting more concerns about privacy, about surveillance, about cybercrime, about theft. And those expectations translate to the governments that are above them, to the e-commerce sites that they do business with, and everything in between, whether it's their healthcare records, right, whether it's the communications that they have with their children. And we know money fuels innovation. The United States government, just the government, is going to spend a little over $6 billion on cybersecurity this year. With the budgets for the traditional defense, ships and planes and soldiers and everything else decreasing, cybersecurity is increasing. As criminals are succeeding in victimizing people and gaining money, they have that to reinvest. It's positive reinforcement to do it again, to do it bigger, to do it better. Lastly, and again, this kind of goes back to the chaotic nature of our world and all the systems that we use. And this wouldn't have actually happened 5-10 years ago. Last year, there was a series of fake tweets, just a handful of them, right? From, well, it was spoofing to look like the President of the United States. And based on those tweets, the United States stock market went into a flash crash, dropped 140 points. They actually had to stop trading on it. That equates to about $200 billion worth of value, just on a few fake tweets. Who would have thought? So what kind of waterfall or cascade effect could that have in your organization? One little system gets hacked, one little thing happens, it could be devastating. In the United States, Target and actually a few other stores right around Christmas time one little thing happened. Over 100 million people's information got released. So it's tough. It's tough for you, it's tough for me. For you to protect your organizations, for me to protect mine, to figure out with everything that's going on, where do we invest? What's the right level of protection? What can we do? Do we give up and go home? No, definitely not. The good news is there are some best-known methods that have held true over time, and that we're constantly learning, and that we're sharing more and more every day on how to protect our environments. Now, when I go out and I talk to companies and sit down, this is one of the first slides that I show. This is the process that we all use to figure out what is that right level of security. I mean, if we had infinite resources, we could spend all of that on security. It doesn't work that way. Right? Even if you could build the perfect security system, it would be not only outrageously expensive, right, but it would become obsolete the day you put it in. Very slowly become obsolete. It doesn't work that way. But we do have to consider the risks as well as the compliance. And we do need to find that right level. But it's in context with two other things, right? How much is it going to cost us? Nothing's free. So we have to worry about the initial investment and the sustaining investment. And that could be equipment, that could be software, that could be training, that could be personnel. Right, again, I don't have an unlimited budget. I have to manage that with the risks that I'm trying to go after. The third element there, the third leg to this, is the productivity of the end user. I see a lot of very young faces out there. How many people remember antivirus? Let's say, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? It used to run and your system would grind to a halt. When the full system scan went, it was normally once a day, it was time to go to lunch. It was time to go home because it would take a long time and you couldn't do anything else. Right? System productivity, people productivity is very important. Many of the different tools that we use in IT are actually to accelerate and increase productivity of our employees. Security can enhance that, but if done wrong, it can actually limit that and hurt the productivity, and the communication, and the servicing of your customers. So that's the first thing that we have to understand from a value aspect. We have to balance these and find roughly what is that optimal level of security where we achieve the right level of risk. You'll never get rid of it all, but the right level of risk at the right investment level with the right productivity and user experience. Are you guys thinking about it in those terms? Are your employees? The other thing is once we do come up with that optimal level, right, which will change over time, by the way, and every person has a different optimal level in this room, we then have to communicate that down to our staff, to our security organizations, and they have challenges because it's great to say, I want approximately this level of risk, I want this kind of compliance. They actually have to then turn that in to real-life controls. And it's not as easy as, again, buying that one box and dialing it in. It's a lot more complex. They have to worry about ingress and egress. They have to worry about vulnerable systems, systems that can't be patched. They have to worry about patching the systems that can. It's a very complex environment that they have to consider. So as leaders of your organization, you don't have to know about all these things or the tweaking or the technology behind each, but you do have to be cognizant that it's very complex, which means there's investment to that. Okay? So we come back to this. We come back to leadership, right? Because it is key. And this isn't just for security, right? This is for every aspect of your business. And for the important ones, you do have leadership, right? So you can organize those resources and service your customers, or maintain, the availability of your systems online, whatever it is. Security is no different. And one of the questions people ask me is, why do some groups fail and other groups are healthy when it comes to security? Well, one of the things that we found is the methodology different organizations use to manage their security, to make security decisions. This is the one we use at Intel. It's basically 4 areas. And again, this is the methodology that we use when we consider what type of controls, right? How are we going to manage to that level, that optimal level of risk? The first is prediction. What we recommend, and we do ourselves, is we want to know who's attacking. What are their methods? What are their objectives? And I can't protect against everything equally. I want to protect against those things and those areas that are going to be attacked. If you have that, it helps you manage your resources much more effectively. The next area is prevention, and we all love this. Very, very, very cost effective. You want to be able to prevent those attacks from happening. And there's many ways of doing that. And you can, again, use technology. You can use behavioral controls. There's many different things. Prevention is always good. But it is not perfect. There is no perfect preventative control. So that brings us down to the bottom half of the cycle, which unfortunately, in most cases, not all, is less cost effective. Now I say that for a reason, not always, right? When your prevention controls fail, and eventually they will, right, you want to be able to minimize the impact, minimize the loss. To do that, you need 2 things. You need the bottom 2 bubbles here. You need to be able to detect it very, very quickly, and then you need to be able to respond to it very effectively to get yourself back into a state of normal operations. And again, I said something earlier, and I said most of the time, it's not as cost effective as prevention. And that's very true. But there are situations that it is more cost effective. There are situations, we call them black swans, right? Which is a situation that is very rare, it's unlikely to happen, but if it does, watch out, it's devastating. And there are a lot of these little black swan scenarios out there. And in most cases, it's very, very expensive to try and prevent every single one of them. So what we advocate is to use the bottom half of that cycle. Because typically, detecting those is very inexpensive compared to what would it take to prevent them. And so if you have a rapid way of detecting and responding to those, you've now optimized your resources. Again, we manage risk of loss, risk of impact. We can never get rid of it all, but we can manage it. And in doing so, setting the expectations, right, with our staff, with the people that we report to. So this is our defense in-depth strategy. And again, it's a methodology to assess what type of controls we need. And at Intel, we have all 4 of those. And where they should be applied, how they should be invested. Now, the other aspect that we see is we have to have a layered defense as well. And what I mean by layered, this is in the both technology as well as behavioral space. We need to have those controls that we talked about, right, at different areas. And I'll get into the reasons why here in a minute. But at the file layer, at the application, platform, network, right, we need to have those controls there. Wherever something's valuable, wherever there's a likely attack. The preventative controls block those attacks, detective controls watch how they get in and try and proliferate, so on and so forth. But I have not met to date, a single organization that invested only in one of these and was successful. Right? Technology is just too interwoven, it's too complex. Okay. So let's talk about the environment and kind of how it's changing. I cherry-picked 3 different threats. We talked a little bit about them already. Right? The first one, the scale and adaptation of attacks. Right? It's getting bigger. The attackers are smarter. There's more of them. The risk is larger. The attack surface is larger, especially as we get more devices, more technologies. Right? CES this year, a whole bunch of new technologies, fantastic great toys. Right? Some of those are going to be adopted and embraced by the world. That's more devices that may be connected to your work network, your home network, that may bleed off more data that may be aggregated somewhere, and may also be an avenue for attack. Second one, increasing the complexity of the attackers, the technology, their behaviors. Keep in mind the attackers, the threats, they are brilliant. They are. Not all of them, but they don't all have to be brilliant, because the brilliant ones share what they know with the non-brilliant ones. Massive data aggregation, right? And it gets leveraged for attacks. Think about all the spam you receive, right? You were targeted. Somebody stole a list of email addresses or your phone number, right? Phishing, spear phishing, it's simply more advanced attacks. Because if they know more about you and who you communicate with, they can craft a message that you're more likely to click. So what do we see in controls? Well, in the industry, we see better threat modeling, right? More financial investment. Your peers, and maybe you as well, are taking cybersecurity more seriously, and they're moving forward with that. They're investing in it. Improved platform and network-based preventative security. It's getting better, right? Is it bulletproof? No, nothing's ever bulletproof. But there is a steady progression in that technology that protects our perimeters, it protects our hosts, where data is stored, where data is used. And lastly, and it goes kind of to the bottom of that defense in depth circle, stronger response capabilities, especially against distributed denial of service attacks and whatnot, better investigations and forensics tools to, again, go back to the one bubble diagram where there's a lot of brown, trying to figure out those unknowns. We're figuring those out because we have to be able to intersect. All right. I love attackers because they follow the path of least resistance. And they will attack in all these areas. They start at the top and they're working their way down. This next year, we're going to see attacks even in the hardware space. Right? And we're seeing a lot of new technologies come out. We're seeing security that lands below the operating system to help with some of those attacks. We're seeing stronger and better encryption and the proliferation of that encryption to many different areas. And again, do we put all our faith in encryption? No. Does it help? Absolutely. Strengthening that data center, the cloud, and the virtualization we talked about. We're seeing more security and more controls land in the data center to protect those types of technologies, right? So we can still reap the gain of the economic benefit while providing security. And figuring out who you're dealing with, whether it's a device, whether it's a person. We're seeing a lot more controls come out, as well as controls that make it easier for us to authenticate. Maybe biometrics, maybe password, savers, whatnot. I'm going to leave you with this thought. Right? There are 2 different types of victims out there. Those with something of value, and those who are easy targets. There's a famous bank robber in the United States back in the 30s, Willie Sutton, and he was asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And his answer resonates and is true today as it was then. He said simply, "That's where the money is." So the question is, do you have something of value? And I bet you do. Right? The other aspect there are easy targets. Where I come from, in California, in the United States, we have bears. We have grizzly bears, and they're mean and ornery, and you never want to feed the bears. we have a saying. If you get confronted with an angry bear that's going to attack you, right, because they're incredibly fast, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the guy next to you. Okay. Same is true in cybersecurity, right? You don't want to be the slowest guy. In the end, don't be an easy target and protect your valuables. It's as simple as that. Okay, last slide. 3 points I want you to consider. All right, number one, well thought out cybersecurity strategy is necessary. You as the leaders are responsible for that. The people beneath you are looking up to you. And without that leadership, what do we have? We have crisis. We have to strive to achieve and maintain that optimal balance. Don't think that you're going to eliminate every single threat, every single risk from now until infinity. Not going to happen, right? Be reasonable, find that right balance, and then go after it aggressively. And lastly, your support, your leadership, that is the key. Without it, your organization will fumble, it will stumble, it will run around in circles, and chaos will ensue. Thank you.
Matthew Rosenquist, thank you. Impressive, scary, but hope-giving as well. That's good. It's a holy trinity sort of.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Hey, let's take questions, comments. Here we go. Okay, Matthew Rosenquist, half of the attack types are unknown. How can we protect ourselves if we don't even know what's attacking us?
It's an excellent question. First off, it's the communication, right? We communicate with each other, we communicate across our industry, and we start to solve those problems. The other thing is many of the organizations are investing in better tools, whether they be forensics, whether they be perimeter-based analysis tools. And again, we can do the same thing that the attackers do. Once we find that out, we can share that knowledge across our industry for everyone's benefit. That's how we team up. It's a crowdsource, and we're the crowd. We can make it better.
Okay, the metrics and trends are alarming and scary. Do we even have a chance to win this war against cyber criminals? Or are we always lagging behind? Few steps at least.
There's good news and bad news, right? The bad news is there is no winner, right? The good news is, yes, we can get to that optimal level of security and maintain it. Like any other business risk or operational risk that we deal with, right? We can manage it and continue with what we're here to do.
It's like sort of a war of attrition from both sides.
It is.
Like
and if you
end,
think about it, the other side doesn't want to destroy the internet, right? They need that as well, right? But in many cases, they maintain that initiative. What we deploy out there, especially if it's not secure, it's just a time bomb. So we have to consider that.
Okay, are the C-level decision makers aware of their responsibility to take care of cybersecurity? What do you think? Are you optimistic?
Flip a coin. Some are and some aren't. Every organization is different, and every group of board members and C-level officers have different backgrounds and skills. What we talk about when we go in is to be able to build an information system to provide them the metrics and the insights to make good decisions. Because without that, you can't expect C-level officers, yourselves or anybody else, to make good decisions. So that has to be part of the system. And you demand data for other important decisions that you make. You need to demand it for cybersecurity as well.
Matthew, technical question. What is signed malware? You mentioned in your first slides.
So again, we used to have the problem of Trojans. Basically, think of it as an infected application. Right? And when you get an infected application, you don't want to install it. So what application providers used to do, and still do today, is once they create their code, and it's nice and clean and perfect, they sign it digitally. And think of it as kind of like encryption, right? And digital signature is similar to that. And it's something that is very difficult to copy, to spoof, to validate. So that when you download your application, your operating system or the security software you're using or whatnot can validate, yes, hey, this is truly from the software provider. And if somebody else took that software and tried to infect it, it would come back to you and say, no, this is not from that vendor. Somebody else has messed with it. So that's what signed malware is they're able to get around those signature controls to where they take that application, they infect it. When it gets to you, it looks like it's pristine from the software vendor.
So like the tweet they thought was from Barack Obama.
Yes.
The same thing. Sort
The
of like
tweet,
this.
they thought, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Right, and what's the difference between, so like, semantical question, what's the difference between information security and cybersecurity? Where is there?
it's a good question, right? Cybersecurity is a larger realm, right? It has to do with anything having to do with the bits and bytes that flow from us into the cyber world. Information security tends to focus strictly on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of critical information to an organization or to a person. So that's really a subset of cybersecurity if you're, connected to the internet, which I assume we all are.
Matthew Rosenquist, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Good stuff.